Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said, "Don't be so touchy." I listened too well. That was the last real thing Emily ever said to me. Everything after that was background noise. Her laughter over the phone, her texts filled with emojis, her late nights finishing campaigns. I stopped asking questions the day I realized she preferred explaining herself to her boss more than to me. My name's Ryan Keller, 37 years old, architect, independent. I build things that last, houses, offices, sometimes bridges. I used to think marriage was one of them. We lived in a small house on the edge of Charlotte, quiet street, decent view. I worked from my home studio. Emily worked downtown at a PR agency that called itself a creative lab, which basically meant long hours, open bars, and a boss who thought charm was currency. His name was Grant Lawson. 45, silver hair, perfect posture, the kind of man who calls everyone kiddo. The first time I met him, he looked at me like a mistake Emily hadn't deleted yet. I didn't need to hear his words. The handshake said it all. Too firm, too long. I remember her smile that night, a little too bright when she talked about how brilliant he was. I noticed she started dressing differently. Bolder colors, more structure. Her style used to be soft, sweaters and sneakers from Walmart runs. Now it was designer blazers and heels she claimed were on sale. The shift was slow, methodical. Starbucks meetings became strategy sessions. Business trips to New York turned into late flights home, her perfume changing each time. She said I was overreacting, too sensitive, too possessive. "Don't be so touchy, Ryan. It's just work." So I stopped being touchy, stopped reacting. I built a wall of silence brick by brick. While she scrolled her MacBook at midnight, I drew new floor plans, long after she fell asleep on the couch with Hulu humming in the background. She didn't notice when I started keeping my sketches in a separate folder labeled Studio. She didn't ask why I spent weekends at Home Depot, buying materials I never mentioned. That winter, I caught her reflection in the kitchen window, texting, smiling faintly at her screen. Her phone buzzed, name flashing, Grant. She turned, startled, half laughing, half guilty. I didn't say a word, just rinsed my coffee mug and walked out to my truck. By the time I got to the office I was quietly building across town, I already knew. I wasn't losing her. She was losing me, inch by inch, in perfect silence. Grant started showing up in conversations the way a ghost haunts a room, quietly, but always there. Emily quoted him when she spoke about work. "Grant says the client loved my pitch. Grant thinks I have real leadership potential." The first few times, I nodded, but each mention scraped a little deeper into me. It wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. I'd seen that tone before, admiration bending into dependence. By spring, she was spending more time at the office than at home. I could track her absence by the number of untouched dinners and the half-empty Starbucks cups she left in the sink. I didn't ask where she was. I already knew the pattern. The company happy hours, the late presentation reviews, the photos she didn't post but he did, always cropped, always suggestive in what they left out. I responded differently. I didn't accuse her or beg for honesty. I adjusted. My projects grew. I took on a new client, a small firm renovating downtown lofts. I started leaving early, saying little, and coming home later than she did. When she noticed, she asked if I was pulling away. I told her nothing had changed, and that was true. The only difference was that she no longer saw me. The house became quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. She filled it with music, phone calls, and the artificial glow of her MacBook. I filled it with blueprints and silence. When she fell asleep on the couch, I'd watch her reflection in the TV screen, her hand twitching like she was texting even in her dreams. One night, she came home early, talking about a promotion Grant had hinted at. She was glowing with that mix of hope and validation people get when they mistake approval for affection. She said Grant believed she could lead major accounts soon, maybe even take his place one day. I congratulated her, and she looked disappointed by how calm I was. That was when I realized she didn't need love anymore. She needed an audience, and I was no longer part of the show. The next morning, I got into my truck before sunrise and drove to the office I'd been quietly building. The drywall was still raw, the floor unfinished, but it was mine. The space smelled of sawdust and freedom. I ran my hand along the beams and thought, this is what real foundations feel like. Solid, earned, untouched by illusion. The first real crack appeared on a Thursday night. Emily came home late again, her perfume sharper than usual, the kind that lingers long after she's gone. She was glowing, that same confident light she used to have when she talked about us. She said Grant had invited her to a client dinner, that she'd been seated beside him because he wanted her perspective. I remember her saying it like a confession wrapped in pride. I just nodded, finished my drink, and went back to sketching. That night, I slept on the couch, not because we'd argued, but because silence had already replaced every word worth saying. I lay there, listening to her heels hit the hardwood as she paced upstairs, on the phone with him again. The voice she used, soft, careful, laughing, wasn't one she'd used with me in months. The next morning, I drove to my site before dawn. I spent the day cutting wood, mixing concrete, building something I could trust. The noise of the tools drowned everything out. Around noon, I sat on the edge of the new foundation with a sandwich from Walmart, thinking about how simple life can be when you strip it down to what's real. No filters, no meetings, no borrowed approval, just the work and the quiet that follows it. When I came home that evening, she was on the couch watching Hulu, half distracted, scrolling her phone. She said Grant had offered to mentor her, help her refine her personal brand. I said that sounded good. She looked at me like she wanted me to fight for her, to remind her she was crossing a line. But I didn't. The battle was already over. She just hadn't noticed she'd lost. The next week, I bought a second desk and moved it into the new office. I started sleeping better there than I did at home. The sound of rain on the unfinished roof felt more honest than any conversation we'd had in months. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I was done defending a place I'd already outgrown. She was chasing validation. I was building freedom. And both of us were getting exactly what we'd earned. Summer came early that year. The air felt heavy, like the world was waiting for something to break. Emily started leaving earlier for work, her outfits sharper, her tone colder. The woman who used to kiss me goodbye now left me with perfume in the doorway and a half-empty cup from Starbucks on the counter. I stopped checking her schedule. I stopped wondering when she'd come home. At night, I'd work late in my new office, a converted garage with exposed beams and the scent of fresh lumber. I kept a small fridge, a coffee maker, a radio that picked up more static than music. It was enough. Every evening, I'd drive my truck back down the empty road toward the house, headlights slicing through the dark. She'd be inside, her MacBook glowing in the living room, her laughter floating through the half-open window. Sometimes I'd stop at the curb and just watch from the driveway. It was strange, realizing you could live beside someone and still be invisible. One night, I caught a glimpse through the window. She was on a video call, hair done, glass of wine in hand, that same bright smile she used to save for me. I didn't need to hear the voice on the other end. I recognized the tilt of her head, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. It was the same habit she had the first night we met. Except now, she wasn't looking at me. I didn't storm in. I didn't confront her. I just backed the truck out quietly and drove until the city lights faded. I pulled into the parking lot of Home Depot, the one that stayed open late, and sat there for an hour, watching men load lumber into their pickups. They looked tired, but peaceful. They had dirt on their hands, not secrets. When I finally went home, she was asleep, the wine glass still on the table, her phone face down beside it. I turned off the lights, picked up my keys, and went back to the office. That night, I decided something final. I wasn't leaving her. I was just going to stop being reachable. After that night, something in me shifted. I stopped reacting. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Instead, I built routine out of distance. Mornings became quiet rituals. Coffee, blueprints, the hum of my computer, the smell of sawdust still clinging to my clothes. I'd leave before sunrise, return after dark. Sometimes I'd sleep in my truck outside the office, pretending I was just working late. Truth was, I didn't want to hear her anymore. Emily noticed, but not right away. At first, she mistook my silence for patience. She'd come home later, testing how far she could push before I'd break. I didn't. She tried to fill the silence with stories, how Grant praised her presentation, how the team respected her now, how close she was to a promotion. I'd nod, say it sounded great, and go back to reading. She didn't realize that indifference is heavier than anger. It doesn't explode, it drains everything slowly, until there's nothing left to take. A few weeks later, she asked if I wanted to join her at a company event. She said Grant insisted on inviting partners. I told her I had a client meeting. That was the first lie I ever told her. Instead, I spent that night painting the office walls white, alone, radio low. The sound of the roller moving across drywall was steadier than my heartbeat. By the time I finished, the room felt new, like a place that didn't owe anyone an explanation. When she came home past midnight, heels in hand, she said I was becoming distant. I told her I'd just been busy. She looked at me like she didn't recognize the man sitting across from her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I'd outgrown the version of myself that kept waiting for her attention. The next morning, she tried to kiss me goodbye before leaving for work. I turned slightly, letting her lips brush my cheek. That small hesitation, barely a second, was all it took. I saw it in her eyes, the moment she realized I wasn't chasing her anymore. And for the first time in months, I felt calm, detached, ready for whatever silence came next. The night everything cracked open didn't start loud. It was a Tuesday. Rain slid down the windows, and the house smelled faintly of her new perfume. Emily was sitting on the couch, typing on her MacBook, pretending to work. I could tell from her posture that it wasn't emails she was writing. Her shoulders were too relaxed, her smile too quiet. I sat at the table, sketching lines that didn't connect, pretending not to notice. Her phone buzzed twice, face down. She glanced at me, hesitated, then picked it up and walked to the kitchen. Her voice dropped low, but the rhythm gave her away. A soft laugh, then that pause she always made when she listened to him. I didn't move. I just let it play out like background noise. When she came back, she looked guilty and defensive all at once. She said Grant was stressed, that he needed advice, that she was just being supportive. I didn't respond. That silence made her nervous. She asked if I was upset, and I told her no. I said, "You're free to help whoever you want." She tried to smile, but it faltered. She wanted a reaction to prove she still had an audience. Instead, she got nothing. The next morning, she left early. I stayed home. I opened her laptop. It wasn't locked. Maybe that was arrogance, maybe a test. Either way, I found what I expected, messages that weren't quite romantic, but weren't professional either. Compliments disguised as mentorship. Plans that sounded like business trips, but read like rehearsed excuses. It wasn't love, it was leverage. She traded loyalty for validation, and he paid her in attention. I didn't print anything, didn't take screenshots. I didn't need proof. Proof was for people still hoping to be believed. I just closed the laptop, made coffee, and went to the office. That day, I poured concrete for the flooring, each shovel of gravel steady, deliberate. By the time I finished, the foundation was solid, drying under the afternoon sun. I wiped my hands, looked at what I'd built, and realized I wasn't rebuilding my life anymore. I was simply finishing hers out of it. After that day, I became invisible by design. I answered her questions with calm precision, moved through the house like a guest who knew he'd overstayed his welcome. She started noticing the gaps, how the coffee maker was quieter in the mornings, how the bed stayed cold on one side. I wasn't gone, but I was no longer there. She tried to pull me back with small gestures. One night she brought home takeout, said we should reconnect. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they realize they've gone too far. I thanked her, ate quietly, and went back to drafting plans. She asked if I was angry. I told her no, just focused. That word, focused, seemed to bother her more than any argument ever could. Her promotion came a week later. She told me at breakfast, her voice full of pride, expecting celebration. I congratulated her, offered a small smile, then drove to my office before she could say more. She didn't understand that indifference was the cleanest revenge. I didn't need to expose her or make a scene. I just needed to remove my attention, the one currency she could never replace. The office was finally finished that weekend. Sunlight cut through the new windows, spilling across the polished floor. It smelled like new beginnings and wood dust. I placed a single photo on my desk, one from years ago, before ambition had replaced love. Then I left it face down. That night, I didn't come home until midnight. She was on the couch, asleep, TV still playing. Hulu flickered across her face, casting her in someone else's story. I turned it off, covered her with a blanket, and stood there for a long time, realizing I didn't feel anger anymore. Just clarity. The next morning, I packed a small bag and moved my essentials into the office: clothes, laptop, a set of keys. I didn't call it leaving. I called it breathing. From then on, I lived in both worlds. Hers, full of noise and performance, and mine, made of structure and silence. I didn't plan to disappear. I just planned to stop being reachable. The first week away felt like breathing after holding my lungs underwater for too long. The office turned into a home without meaning to. I brought in a mattress, a coffee maker, and a small shelf with the few books I still cared about. The nights were quiet, steady. The sound of passing cars outside was softer than her voice had been for months. I didn't miss her. I missed who I'd been before I started trying to win her back. Emily texted me the second night. She said she was worried, that I'd been distant. She asked if we could talk. I stared at the screen for a long time before putting the phone face down. I'd already learned that some conversations exist only to reset power. I wasn't going to feed that anymore. By Friday, she came to the office. She stood at the door in her tailored blazer, arms crossed, pretending confidence. She said she just wanted to see the space I'd been working on. I told her she was welcome to look around. She commented on the design, the smell of fresh wood, the size of the windows. She said it felt very professional. I said that was the point. She was trying to find an opening, some emotional crack to slip through. I didn't give her one. She asked if I was angry. I told her no. She said she missed me. I nodded once. Her voice started to shake when she realized I wasn't playing the old roles anymore. The calm husband, the audience, the safety net. She left after 10 minutes, saying she had a meeting. I watched her car pull away, taillights fading like a closing chapter. That night, I drove to a quiet diner near Home Depot. The waitress recognized me from my late-night coffee runs and asked how the building was coming. I told her it was finally done. She smiled and said, "Good. You look lighter." Maybe I was. For the first time in months, I went home to the house we once shared. It was empty, quiet, cleaner than I remembered. Her things were still there, but her presence wasn't. It felt like walking through a museum. Everything preserved, nothing alive. I realized then that she hadn't left me. I'd already left her long before I ever packed a bag. A month passed before she showed up again. I'd stopped checking her social media, but word gets around in small circles. Someone mentioned she'd been seen with Grant at a conference in Chicago, and I didn't flinch. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that caring had become irrelevant. The foundation of my new life had already dried. That evening, she appeared at the office just as the sun was setting. She looked different, tired, older, the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing things that keep moving away. She said she'd been meaning to stop by, that she missed our talks. I offered her a chair. She sat, crossed her legs, and looked around like she was searching for a version of me she still recognized. She didn't find him. She said things had changed at work. Grant was stepping back, and people were talking. Her promotion wasn't as stable as she thought. She said she felt lost. I listened, calm, still. She was waiting for me to comfort her, to play the role she'd abandoned. I didn't. I just said, "You'll figure it out." She blinked, surprised, as if I'd spoken another language. Then she asked if we could start over. She said we'd both made mistakes. I told her I agreed. But when she asked if I wanted to fix things, I said nothing. That silence stretched until she realized it was an answer. She stood, her voice breaking slightly, said she missed who I used to be. I told her so did I. Then I walked her to the door, polite, distant, final. She lingered for a moment, maybe expecting me to stop her. I didn't. After she left, I stood by the window, watching her car pull onto the road. The sky was turning dark, the streetlights flickering on one by one. It looked peaceful, almost cinematic, the end of something that no longer hurt. Later that night, I drove to Walmart, picked up groceries, small things for a quiet weekend. As I walked back to my truck, I caught my reflection in the window. Same face, different man. I wasn't rebuilding anymore. I was already built. And she was just now realizing she couldn't reach me from where she'd fallen. It's strange how endings don't make noise. They just dissolve into ordinary days. The morning after she left the office, the sun came through the blinds the same way it always did. My coffee tasted the same. The city sounded unchanged. But everything was lighter. Emily called a week later. I didn't answer. She left a message saying she'd made mistakes, that she finally understood what she'd lost. I listened once, then deleted it. Understanding always comes too late, when the silence has already settled. I focused on work. The new firm grew faster than I expected. Clients liked the precision, the calm. They said I had a way of making things feel grounded. I smiled at that. It wasn't talent. It was the discipline of someone who'd already lived through collapse and learned to build without noise. One afternoon, I drove past our old house. Her car was gone. A for sale sign leaned against the mailbox. The yard looked smaller than I remembered. Through the window, I saw the living room. The couch, the same one where she used to fall asleep with Hulu playing. I parked for a minute, then kept driving. Some places lose their shape once you stop belonging to them. That night, I stopped at the diner near Home Depot. The waitress poured my coffee, asked if things were good. I told her they were steady. She said that's better than good. She was right. I still think about the day she told me, "Don't be so touchy." She meant it as a joke, a way to dismiss what she didn't want to confront. I took it as a command, and I obeyed too well. Now, when people ask if I regret how quiet I was, I tell them silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's the moment you stop giving people access to your peace. By the time Emily came back from chasing the life she thought she wanted, I was already living the one I'd built with my own hands. Some men fight for attention. Others build walls high enough that no one can climb them again. She reached for power. I answered with distance. And in the end, she learned, silence has the last word. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.